Hi, everyone. My name is Olivia Brady. I'm the Youth Engagement Coordinator for NYC Votes at the Campaign Finance Board, and I am so excited to be here hosting another segment of Represent NYC with the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Today, I am pleased to be in conversation with four incredible youth advocates, James Lherisson, Edward Sanchez, Felicia, Trestin, and Nyah Colòn. And today we're really going to be talking about how to engage youth beyond the ballot box. We just had a major local election, and now it's time to really dig down and do some of that advocacy work. At NYC Votes over the last year, we've really been working to expand our youth civics programming to include a set of local history lessons. They cover Robert Moses, the Young Lords, and Shirley Chisholm, and they're really designed to give youth historical context for how power works at the local level, and also to provide a concrete framework for how to organize in your community. We know that creating holistic civics education is vital to engaging youth in a meaningful way. And so with that in mind, we want to hear from these four youth organizers who have been working to educate their peers. So to kick us off, I really just want to start off with a basic question here. Why is just doing education and advocacy around voting, government, civics, and history, why is it important to you, and what kind of calls you to this work? And I'll kick it over to James, who can get us started.
For me, when I think of government, I think about things that directly affects me, especially on the local level. Especially when you look at the government officials, there's not youth that's represented. So the reason why I wanted to get into this work is to call in my fellow peers so we could work together to have better conditions. I'm coming from the South Bronx, and it's definitely a part of New York which is often forgotten, especially on the polls, especially outside of the polls. And we need more organizing to help nourish everyone here. So yeah.
For me, government is a foundation for society. Of course, we always vote, right? And hopefully everyone who is watching right now, everyone is voting. And as a youth, I always see that partly civic engagement, and I always want civic education to be pushed upon, that as we grow older, we need to be contributing more to society. And one way is being part of government. And government holds a lot of positions that is very vital for the services that we need as citizens, especially here in the city. And government really is important in terms of being able to provide the needs for certain people that need those services. And I believe that government is a very vital role in, helping, run our lives, in terms of taxes, but of course in giving us the benefits that we need. So, yeah.
So when I think about educating students and youth about voting, I think it goes hand in hand with educating youth about local history as well, and just history in general. I feel like educating youth about history and people's experiences and how different parts of their identity intersect and all of that kind of stuff really helps people make decisions when it comes to actually going out to the polls and voting. So I think it's important that we teach both to everybody.
I completely agree. I just wanted to be part of youth advocacy because I feel like a lot of people, when they think of youth, they don't really think that we can do much. Like there's not a lot of ways that we can truly help. And I wanted to help change that because as youth, we are just a lot more in tune, I would like to say, with, social media and learning about, so many social topics, so many social issues at a rapid pace that it can become overwhelming sometimes. So being part of youth advocacy, pointing people like me in the right direction to try and teach them how to properly, state their opinions, find ways of truly expressing themselves. And then when they get older, they can take what they have learned and go out and vote, or just, be more compelled to get more involved in their community and society.
Thank you so much. I'm so touched by all of those answers, and I'm feeling very motivated by them. Another question for just all participants. You all do a lot of work to educate your peers specifically about history. And so I'm just wondering if you could touch a little bit more specifically about that. And what role does learning about our collective history play into civic life? And how do historical examples help guide you in this work? And are there any particular historical examples that you are really in touch with or find inspiration from?
I could start it off. So for me, it's really important because people in the past have set the foundations for the people in the future. When I look back, I think about like the freedom riders, and I'm thinking about people like the young lords, and it's giving someone as like, for example, me, which is a young Black Latina, that people like me was organizing and was resisting these oppressive structures. You know, for instance, like I especially like have like think about it when I'm doing work like getting out to vote events, and I'm talking to my BSU and to my fellow college students to register to vote for local elections. We talk about not only voting but the limits on it, and how we need to be more organizing, because people usually think that it starts and ends with the polls, which really isn't the case. And I really am grateful for Olivia and We Power NYC for showing that and expressing that. So recently, I learned about the Young Lords, and like it was really dope. Like just like the resistance and the grassroots organizing that they did, especially being Dominican. Like just seeing Puerto Ricans, Black and brown Puerto Ricans, just like doing their things, like stealing an ambulance because there was literally not giving medical supplies, and like putting trash all over NYC, because it wasn't picking it up. And it's just like it's something that is like it's tangible for me. It's more like when I think of like people like Malcolm X, it's like doing things by any means necessary. And I was just like, wow, that's dope. Yeah, like I could see myself doing that, you know, especially because like when it comes to like respectability politics, when it comes to organizing, people think that you're supposed to do things by the book and you got to ask people for your rights. I'm like, no, it's not happening. If we're going to take what we deserve because we're human, and just like the Young Lords was like such a perfect example, and I was just like blown away by their actions.
What James said is amazing, and that is correct. For me, when learning about our collective history, it really teaches us. It's a lesson, right? It's history. It's what people did in the past, and how do we use that knowledge to benefit ourselves and go forth and do more. And for me, it's always, I would say, like, history repeats itself. Well, it won't repeat itself if we learn from the mistakes beforehand, and then we apply its strengths, not its weaknesses, and get change done. And one historical moment, I would say for me, an historical example is when I believe it was 1964 in February, when half of the New York City public school system children went out and protested and boycotted against segregation, which was one of the largest civil rights movements here in New York City. And I always look back at that, how motivational and inspirational it is, and to see how, it cultivated over the years, how we have the NYC Integrate movement as of this day, with trying to desegregate the New York City public school system, which is still heavily segregated to this day, with one of the nation's largest education system, and it's still segregated, which is still terrible thing. But that historical moment is what really kind of speaks to me in volumes, to show how they did in the past. We can do it too. We can do it now, and we can do it in the future. And I always look back at it with such inspiration.
I really love both of the examples that you guys just gave. And I kind of wanted to take what you just said and touch on it. And I was going to mention like the Teens Take Charge organization. I did a project over the summer with NYC Votes about how we can get rid of standardized testing and like the problems with it and the things that come with it. And I thought that Teens Take Charge was a really inspirational organization, because it was student-led, and it really shows that like students could get a lot of things done. Like even things with like regarding SYEP, when they got a lot of money raised for the summer youth employment budget, that really helped a lot of local New Yorkers and youth like get jobs for the summer and help to provide for themselves. And I feel like that was a really cool thing, especially because it was youth-led. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, knowing our collective history is essential to being a member of society. I mean, because the main thing that we want to help is that knowing our history will help change it in the future. We can help change it. Sorry. And just history will always play an important role because we will always be a part of history, whether it might be a small little dot on a page or the entire portrait of a textbook. And I think one of the most like significant examples of historical just beauty was how like during the Yellow Peril with the Chinese Exclusion Act, it didn't just affect Chinese Americans who were facing racism. It affected all Asian Americans because no one cared to differentiate us. And so all of these Asian Americans of these completely distinct cultures came together to work and defend one another, saying that we are American. We deserve this place that we have gained in this country, and we will stay here, whether you like it or not. And I just found that so motivational because unfortunately, that's something that we still have to fight for even till this day. So seeing how they were able to take up and withstand this type of brutality and yet still come out being greater than all of these other people who thought that they don't even deserve to live here is just so inspirational as an Asian American. And it just really makes me understand that if I can take what they have done and utilize it now as like, you know, during the Stop Asian Hate movement and just the racism that I have experienced throughout my life, maybe I can actually like make a significant change on not just my life, but other Asian Americans of any type of Asian ethnicity.
I want to take a minute for us to just sit in the tremendous collective knowledge that the four of you are bringing to the table right now. And something I always share with my ambassadors, which might be a little cheesy, but it really is true. When we learn these histories that are not always readily accessible to us, they really do change us and change the way that we approach the world. So thank you so much for sharing that perspective with us. And I want to give a question to James right now. James is an artist and an aspiring educator, and I would just love to hear your thoughts on the role that schools can play in building civic engagement, and moreover, specifically, how educators can really play a bigger role in building that muscle among our city's people.
It's something like I'm extremely passionate about because I really want to be a change maker in the education system. As an educator, being with students, one thing that I've realized just as a student myself is just like, in order for me to see myself doing something, I have to see someone do something first. It wasn't until I saw a Black queer professor that I wanted to be a teacher, because it wasn't tangible for me to do anything without seeing someone like me doing things that I want to do, you know, especially like having curriculum that are culturally responsive and going to depths of history, queer history, women's history. That's not just, you know, the typical white male text that we usually just go through in school. I would say like a great way for schools to do so is just incorporating more unorthodox things that you generally don't see in education. So for example, I'm an artist. Art, simply, you could, for example, use spoken word to really communicate complex problems and complex issues and bring it forward. Things like, even though it might be problematic depending on the source that you get it from, like things like battle rap, incorporating into the education space, so we could go in depth in language and art and how African Americans use it. You know, that's something that that I feel like is very like revolutionizing, because it's like it's using things that kids are already watching and really doing, and just like you could do this too, and also you could be civically engaged and you could do so while doing art as well. Like for example, a great example is like Kendrick Lamar and like showing To Pimp a Butterfly, songs like Sing About Me. You know, it's just like the possibilities are endless. As a student, I am tired of being in a classroom bored, reading like a video, a song, drawing, and showing resistance through that way is something that like it don't get enough love for students. And I feel like once we do that and we continue to do that, the possibilities are honestly endless.
I want to pass it over to Edward now for a question. Edward definitely has a lot of experience on like the advocacy and lobbying side of things, which is incredible. I'd love to hear just a bit about the work And then, just like you are someone who is stepping into spaces that are often dominated by adults. And so as a young person navigating these spaces, what are some tactics like that you have developed and used to really assert yourself to make sure that you're taken seriously and treated equally, and that youth concerns are really prioritized when you're doing lobbying and advocacy?
It's a really great question. Well, for me, I'll try to simplify because I can talk about all day long. But for here in New York City, I've been part of multiple movements. But I'll say the most notable ones and the ones that are passionate for me, I'm more into the education aspect. And so one movement I was part of and I was really rallying for was SYP, the Summer Youth Employment Program, which is very vital here in New York City. And that before with the de Blasio administration, they didn't really like that. So every year we would always be pushing for SYP to be instated and even added more. And so luckily, for this summer, we had SYP instated because it was being threatened to be shut down. Didn't happen. The power of advocacy, right? It's amazing. I love it. And another one I was also pushing for, and this is kind of on the statewide, but the Educational Foundation Aid, which pushes for more funding for our New York City public schools system. And that was when I would go to Albany. And I've done multiple things, but more locally, I, as myself, a peer trainer with TCC, I go around to the city and I get to speak with students on the power of advocacy and getting to teach them what it is to have a voice and to really use that voice to make a difference. And I just love what I do. And I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to get to change minds and get to, give students the opportunity for themselves to speak out and have that change happen, right? The power of advocacy can happen just from one person, right? You see Greta Thunberg, she sailed across the ocean just to make a point, and it really worked well. And so you can really do it from one person, from one voice. And to answer the second part, which is the tactics I use, well, adults can be very condescending, I must say. Throughout my time, working with adults, of course, they're amazing adults. Olivia, I know you're wonderful. I have worked with you. I remember years before. I remember you're a very great adult ally, I must say. And also Laura from CCC is kind of like, showing me the way of how to really advocate. It is very difficult in the room, right? To have a voice, to get to say something while also at the same time being heard, being understood, and also being able to really being able to push that idea forward. Because most of the time, if there's an adult in the room, they would just restate what you said and reaffirm what you said and say, good job, keep going, right? I want them to change, not change. I want to change their mind. I want them to be influenced by what I say, and I want them to go out and make the change happen. And what I always say is I always like to write my own narrative, right? And to control that narrative, to keep talking and don't let them just interrupt and say, oh, this is great. And then just reiterate what you just said, but just keep talking. Let the words sink into their ears, let them hear, process it, and say, dang, this kid, he's got a point. I want to make this change happen. And so it's all about having the narrative and not letting, of course, if you're working with other youth, you always want to push the narrative together, but it's always being heard. It's always making sure that your voice is loud and that everyone in the room, everyone on the table will hear you, understand you, and will push it with you forward into legislation. And like I said, there's some great adults out there that I've met in my life where they heard they heard what we wanted to do. We want to change. We want to create a better world for us youth, especially here in New York City. And there's some others that were like, yeah, that's cool. This is cool. And that's it. And also the idea of follow-up, right? Follow-up emails are amazing. You send the email saying, oh, are you still on this? And they'll be like, oh, of course. Right. So it's the pressure as well. It's pressuring them to hear you and to really push forward and keep, doing the advocacy. And so, like I always say, I always love to speak, and I always try to push the narrative by just speaking out and also being passionate. Because if they see that you are, stubborn and hard-headed into what you want to do, they can't just look away. They have to pay attention. So it's always about having the voice and having that strong voice that you can just push what you want to, happen.
Thank you so much for sharing that great advice. I think we can definitely take away with us, especially the idea of applying pressure, staying consistent, and showing that you really are dedicated and paying attention to what elected officials are doing. It really does make a big impact. So for our last two questions of the evening, I want to reach out to Felicia and Nyah, who are part of their school's Respect for All Club. So my first question is going to go to Felicia. So voting right is, of course, a fundamental part of civic life. This as a We Power NYC ambassador, but you also understand that civic engagement doesn't just stop there. So really, in your opinion, and coming from your experience organizing with Respect for All, what does it mean to actually go beyond the ballot box? And why do you think that this concept is an important lesson to learn?
So I think that going beyond the ballot box really means to really get in touch with your community, do the research to figure out things about experiences that you might not have yourself. Maybe your friend or your neighbor or someone has an experience that you don't share with them, and you take the time to learn about other people's experiences and educate about them and really apply it to when you make your decisions on voting. And not only that, but not just educating people on history and experiences and intersections and things like that, but also helping to provide resources to people that might not have them about voting. I know with the We Power NYC ambassador program, I was able to do a few different Get Out the Vote events where me and my partner Nikita, we went out and we went to different community fairs. We hosted events for our schools. All about getting people to learn about voting. And with the Respect for All Club that we run, it's really a big goal of ours is to create a citywide curriculum where people can learn about different experiences, different cultures, and things like that, because it's really not integrated into our education generally. There are so many people that feel left out when learning about history, and even in health classes or anything in the public school systems, that it just doesn't apply to themselves, or a lot of people find it hard to relate to those things. So going beyond the ballot box would honestly be educating about resources, different identities and things like that, and just applying it to when you're voting or when you're trying to encourage people to vote.
Thank you so much for that thoughtful answer, Felicia. And last, but certainly not least, I have a question for Nyah, who goes to school with Felicia. They organize in Respect for All together. You've been involved in planning events to help increase youth engagement in your community. And I would love to hear in particular a little bit about a community event you organized on Native American Heritage Month. What did it look like? What were your goals? And how did it ultimately turn out?
So recently we created these groups of slides about Native American Heritage Month that we would send all to the school-wide to all of the classes and subsequently to all of the teachers to kind of show and let them learn about, the beautiful intricacies of Native American heritage, what their cultures are, what their cultural significances are, and the struggles that they have and still very much so struggle with to this day. Because in our school, at least, the Native American population that we have is less than 1%, but they should still be represented just as much as every other culture. But we're not really given that privilege of learning about other cultures, if any cultures really. So that's kind of what we wanted to accomplish with this teachings that we are trying to do. Luckily, our school board they've been somewhat cooperative with us. They're a little conservative about it, but it's fine. We're nailing them in the heads enough. We take this really seriously. We think that this is something that should be ingrained in our curriculum since the beginning. This is not something that should be debated on. So we really took these slides, we really gave it as much positive feedback as possible. We didn't want it to be all negative. In fact, we even interviewed one of our staff members who is Native American to try and ensure that our slides are culturally appropriate and really show all of the intricacies of the culture, because really the only way to know about other people's cultures is to learn from people of that culture. You don't want to be tone deaf about it. So luckily, in due time, the slides will be taught to all of the classes. It's most likely going to be next week of the week of Thanksgiving. And right now we're in the process of, sending it to the school board, making sure there's, no like grammatical errors, because sometimes that happens, and ensuring that everything in there is good to go. All of the editing is nice and to the T. And we're just really proud of it. And so far, we've had some astounding positive feedback on it. And it just makes me feel so proud that I'm actually a part of something that is educating people in not just like, math or science, because I'm not good at those. I actually want to do something that I can teach these people about, something that's not really taught at all, especially in a very not as diverse school as ours.
Thank you so much. And as a gender studies major, I can totally relate to your need for more robust humanities programming at school. But I really just want to thank you all so much for bringing your time, your knowledge, and really your honest perspectives on this topic. I feel so invigorated after having this conversation and so excited to see what the future of New York City holds. You all are so incredibly intelligent and most importantly, compassionate people. And I can really tell that this is where your organizing and drive to advocate comes from. So again, thank you all so much. And again, I would be remiss if I didn't mention, we just had a huge local election that came up, but 2022 has a lot in store. We're redistricting, there's a governor's race. So to get involved, to learn more information, you can always visit voting.nyc for nonpartisan, reliable information about voting and local government. That's also available in several languages. Again, I just want to thank you all so much for being here today and sharing your wisdom with us. Thank you so much. And thank you for watching Represent NYC on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Have a good night.